Looks like we got 65 people waiting. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Charles Sterling. I think you've joined me for one or two of these before. See, we've got Ashok on. He's actually was on like 30 minutes early. So Ashok, thank you very much. David is one of the PMs in the team. Swati is one of the PMs in the team. And Josh is actually leading this brave charge, and he's actually going to go out and do something a little bit unique for us. We're going to go out and see if we can't make a presentation mostly about your guys' conversations. I know Avi Singh, who was actually with us yesterday, does this on a regular basis. It's very fun, it's very interactive, but it does rely on people like Apraka from Sydney and Mohammed from Paris. So you guys are going to help us out. Otherwise, we're going to get some canned presentations, and as Josh described, it's going to go very fast. So Josh, before you get into the content, I would like you to actually introduce yourself.
Yeah, so hey, I'm Josh Caplan. I'm the Group Program Manager for Power BI Premium. This includes all the aspects of Power BI Premium, and as well as our analysis services, some of the advanced data modeling functionality that we have recently brought to Power BI. For this topic, we'll talk specifically on Power BI Premium. And really about how you can get capacities and manage those capacities. As Chuck said, we're looking to make this pretty interactive, so please ask questions as they come up. I put together some slides just so we can have some stuff to look at while the questions come up, but please, it's really more about answering your questions. So with that, I'll get started. If you're familiar with Power BI Premium, Power BI Premium is dedicated capacity that you can purchase for Power BI. It lets you actually license to as many users as you want to have view content. So normally you would go and you would pay per user for Power BI, but every single user who comes into Power BI would need to have a license. With Premium, you're buying specific resources just for your users. You manage those resources. So if you have enough resources to handle your users, you can have as many users as you want there. And they can view as much content as you put there. But it all comes down to you having the capacity to handle that workload. And since this is resources that are just dedicated to you, it's your own capacity, we can do things like have larger models or more frequent data refreshes. Things that when you were in what we called our shared environment, where you were on there with other customers, we had to kind of turn down just so each customer didn't negatively affect the other customer. But here, it's your capacity. You can do whatever you like. Now, in order for you to manage these capacities, you really need to see what's going on. And with Premium, when it first came out, we initially released these set of metrics that showed you really your memory usage, your CPU usage of the capacity itself. This one here is actually showing memory usage of one of my Premium capacities. And it's a typical week for one of my capacities. All this is showing me is the memory at those times is by hour for those days. But is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's hard to tell. Is my capacity, do I have enough capacity to handle my workload? Are my users getting a good experience? Do I need to buy more capacity? These metrics alone are not enough to really tell. In order for you to understand how your capacity works and when you need more, you really need to understand how Power BI Premium works first. And we've been spending a lot of time changing and tweaking how Premium works so we can more easily explain it. And now we're going through the process of explaining it and putting out metrics and reports where you can actually see what's going on. So I'll start by actually walking through how Premium works. As I mentioned before, you buy a capacity that's dedicated specifically to you. So a P1 capacity has 8 vCores, and we do 4 front-end vCores and 4 back-end vCores. So the front-end vCores are for things like refreshing the report, like actually scheduling the refresh of the reports, some of the rendering. Where the back-end vCores is really where all the power is. That's where you're doing all the queries, you're processing your data, you're going through the really intense operations. So when you buy a P1, you get 4 back-end vCores. That comes with 25 gigs of memory and 100 terabytes of storage. Now, the 100 terabytes of storage is where your data sets live. Now, a lot of people ask me, does that mean I can have 100 terabytes of data sets? The answer to that is yes and no. You can have 100 terabytes of data sets, but you only have 25 gigs of memory. And when a user actually comes in and queries a data set, we have to load that data set fully 100% into memory. So yes, you can have 100 terabytes of data sets, but you need to have enough memory to support the data sets that are all going to be used in parallel. So I don't have 100 terabytes of memory. I can't use all these data sets at one time. But in this case, the example I'm showing here, I'm using 3 of the data sets. And they fit within the 25 gigs fine. This is a capacity that has a lot more room to grow. But what happens when they do grow? What happens when you do start to consume all those resources? But have there been any questions so far?
There have been a shitload, excuse the language, and one of which is from Potter from Switzerland. He goes, hey, is there any chance we could see this brand new monitoring app that you were just showing? And
yeah, we'll get there in a few moments. I have that right lined up after this.
Okay. Want me to give you the other ones, or do you want to keep going?
So I just want to make sure I'm not going too fast.
No, we've got a lot of questions. So
okay.
You let me know when. Dan English, Yana, James Ward, Tian Talgert, all have got questions in the queue. We're ready at any time.
Okay. Well, if you want to go with a couple, I'm more than willing.
David Elversveld is asking a related question: is how can orgs judge how much capacity they need before they purchase the premium? Which one do they want, and which one are they going to best use their money? So I think that's related to what you're going to be covering in a second.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the most common question I get is how many users can my capacity handle? Well, as these few slides are starting to show, it's not necessarily about it all comes down to users at some point, but the factors are not necessarily based on the users. Let me actually go a little bit further, and I'll walk through some of these details, which will help answer this question.
Okay.
So what happens when you start to run out of resources? So in this case, we have all 25 gigs of memory filled with data sets that are being queried. 6 different data sets that are being queried. Now, data set number 7 wants to come in. Someone opened up a new report that's pointing to data set number 7. Now, there's no room in it for memory, so we can't load it. What we'll do is we'll look for data sets that are no longer being used. In this case, data sets number 2 and data sets number 4 are no longer being used. So we can do what's called eviction and kick that data set out of memory. And then we can load data set number 7 into memory, and now it can be queried. So how many users can my capacity handle at one time? Well, the answer is going to be very different if you have 1,000 users all querying the same data set versus maybe 20 users all querying different data sets. Because in the case of the 20 users, we'd have to load 20 data sets into memory. And if there's not enough room, we won't be able to do that. So at this point, the capacity is starting to warm up a little bit. It's definitely getting more usage, but your users are probably not noticing anything because we can evict data sets, bring new ones in. If they're small data sets, it's a very cheap operation. When you start to get into the multiple gigabyte size of data sets, eviction can be a little more costly. But this is the way the system works. It balances itself. This is what allows you to actually get more data sets on a capacity than you have memory to support, because we will kick things in and out of memory when they're not being used. So what if all your memory is being used by refreshes? Another common question is how many data sets can be refreshed at one time? Everyone wants to schedule their data sets to run at like 7 a.m. before they come into work, or seems like the most common time it actually seems to be 1 a.m. right after the day changes over. So if 1,000 people schedule their data sets to go all refresh at one time, what happens? Oh, so we will actually limit the number of refreshes based on CPU and memory. So refreshes tend to be a bit more CPU intensive than queries. Queries can also be CPU intensive. But refreshes are also limited by memory, just like queries were. So in this case, 7 refreshes tried to all run at the same time. So we'll actually only run 1.5 times the number of backend cores you have. in terms of the number of data sets. So for a P1 with 4 backend V cores, that'll be 6 data sets that will all run. But we submitted 7, so what happens? So the 7th one won't fail. What will happen is the 7th one will actually go and be queued. And it'll stay in that queue until one of the other ones finishes. And then we evict that other one, and we'll load the 7th one, and it'll start to refresh. So when you don't have enough resources, your refreshes won't fail, but they will take longer. So another factor now to look at is how many refreshes are we going to have at one time. So at this point, again, the system is still pretty warm. The capacity is still warm, but users really aren't noticing much problems other than maybe the refreshes are taking longer. So you might schedule something at 7 a.m. and it actually finishes at 7:15, or even longer than that. And it's kind of up to you as the capacity admin to determine when you think that queue is getting too long. And you have a couple options there. One is to add more capacity so you can process more in parallel, or take things off of this capacity. Another option is also to reach out to the owners of those data sets and tell them to use things like incremental refresh, so that their data sets actually refresh faster. When things finish faster, you can do more things in the same amount of time. All those are options. So these are the limits, CPU limits basically by SKU. And it's 1.5 times the number of backend cores. So more cores means more refreshes in parallel. So far, we've actually looked at we looked at queries and we've looked at refreshes separately. What if your capacity is now being heavily used and you got a combination of refreshes and queries going on at the same time? So in this example, I have 4 data sets that are actively being queried. Since they're actively being queried, it means they can't be evicted. We will not evict anything from memory that's active. And then we also have refreshes. 2 of them in this case. And dataset number 7 now wants to come in and be queried. We don't have memory for dataset number 7. So what we'll do in this case is we will always prioritize interactive over background. So in this case, querying is interactive. Someone's sitting in front of the Power BI UI, running a report, interacting with the report, and waiting for results to come back. Versus background, where someone schedules a refresh, leaves the building, comes back the next day, and sees the results. If someone's actually sitting and waiting for interactive things to finish, we will prioritize those higher. So in this case, we have no capacity for anything. Dataset number 7 is being queried, or wants to be queried, and we need to pull it into memory. So we'll look and see, okay, is there any inactive data sets that we can evict? And in this case, everything's active or being refreshed, so there's nothing to evict there. Then we'll look, okay, are there any caches, any temporary memory usage that we can also kick out? If that's not there, we don't get any benefits there. So we still have to find some room for data set number 7. So since we prioritize interactive over background, what we'll do now is we'll stop one of the data sets that's refreshing and put it back in the queue, evicting it so that data set number 7 can now go ahead and be queried. So again, someone who's querying Power BI, looking at reports, is probably not noticing any problems here. Everything's working great, but someone who's scheduling refreshes might be noticing the refreshes taking even longer now. Because we have to stop it, put it back in the queue. Now it's waiting for resources to free back up. So your capacity is starting to get hotter and hotter here. Whether you need more capacity, again, it's kind of a judgment call. Queries seem to be working fine. Refreshes are taking longer now. And again, there's a bunch of things you can do to optimize the usage of the capacity by making your refreshes more optimized, doing better queries, different model designs. We'll get into that a little bit. That'll actually make better use of the capacity so that you can get more out of it. What happens if we're in the worst case scenario? So is there a question?
So Josh, there is a question by Dan English, and this might be a good time to answer. So the question is, when will we be able to pin datasets into memory? when this happens, would it be possible for us to pin too much so that we wouldn't be able to swap out data sets?
And he had a related question of how to actually look at the amount of memory one particular data set is using. So I think those questions go hand in hand by Dan.
Yeah. So I'll answer the last one first. How do you look at how much memory a data set is using in memory? Unfortunately, today you can't. But in the next week or two, we're going to add to the metrics report the size in memory. So that'll help you a lot. And I'll also show you the count of things that are in memory. We're still missing, but we're working on it as well, a breakout of what the data sets are actually active or inactive in memory. So a lot of customers come to me and say, well, my memory is being used, but I'm not doing much. Well, as soon as we've loaded a data set into memory, we'll actually leave it in memory until we get memory pressure. This way, if someone comes back to use that data set, it's already there, it's already ready to go. We don't have to reload it. But as soon as we start getting memory pressure, new data sets need to come in, we'll start kicking things out. So even if your memory is pretty much pegged at the top, it doesn't mean you have a problem if you have data sets that can be evicted still. So coming very soon will be the size of the data sets in memory, how many are actually in memory, and then shortly after that, a breakout of how much of that memory is being used by active data sets, meaning the remainder of the memory is actually evictable to make room for new data sets. The second question was around pinning models into memory. That one's a little bit longer out. We're basically trying to time that with when we release the ability to have even larger models in Power BI. Right now, we restrict you to really a 10 gig PBIX file when you upload it. You can still get a little bit bigger than that after you've uploaded it. When we start doing even larger sizes, we'll be able to go up to hundreds and hundreds of gigs if you want. Then we'll actually, as part of that feature, we're doing the work to let you actually say, okay, this model always stays in memory. Now, when it always stays in memory, basically it means it's unevictable. And any other data sets trying to share that memory are going to have to work around it. And if there's nothing that can be evicted, then you're in the scenario I'm about to show here, which is kind of the worst case scenario. Let me jump into that. This is a scenario where everything's in memory and being actively used. Today, that would be because you filled the memory up with data sets that are currently being queried. Someone's using reports against them. Someone's using Q&A against them. Any of the ways to actually interactively query someone's doing. In the future, this could be because maybe you pinned them to memory. Now, data set number 7 wants to be queried, but we have no memory for it. So we'll go through the process. Is there anything that can be evicted? The answer is no, because everything's active. And are there any refreshes we can go and queue? Nope, everything's being used for querying. The refresh queue is actually already starting to back up. So now what do we do? So what we'll do is we'll retry for about 30 seconds to wait for things to free up and look for something we can evict. And if we can't find that, we will fail this particular request and return to the user something along the lines of, to the actual end user, return something along the lines of your capacity is busy right now. Please try again a little later. Hopefully they try again later and everything just works. But we do this so that we protect the experience for the queries that are currently going on. Previously, we were not doing this, and we were pulling things in and out of memory as they're actually being used, and that was what that thrashing metric was. And it ended up just being a bad experience for everyone. So now this keeps a much more stable and predictable experience. And you can monitor when this happens. And if you're seeing this, this is a sign that, yeah, okay, either you need more capacity or you need some smaller or less intense data sets that are using less memory. But at this point, I'd say you're burning. There might be room for optimizations, but you might want to start considering looking at more capacity. So this is actually documented at aka.ms/PBIP how it works.
Josh, there was one question from Lutz Benlin about how do we decide which dataset is more important when there are conflicting kind of incoming, as you just described. So I think it's worth noting how do we basically decide, like, they're all equally important for us.
Yeah, so we break the prioritization down by interactive or background. So if it's a query request, it's definitely going to be a higher priority than any data sets that's being used in a background operation. Within interactive, we don't break it down any further. If you have certain data sets that maybe it's an executive dashboard, they have to be prioritized higher. I would recommend in that case having a specific capacity just for those, so they're not mixed in with all your other lower priority reports in that case. So basically, you can split it by capacity. So let's say you purchased a P2. You can actually split the P2 into a P1 and into two P1s if you wanted to. I don't know if you know this, but when you buy capacities now, you're actually just really buying the cores, and you can rearrange those cores in any configuration you want. So in the case of the P2, maybe I split it into two P1s, and I put all my self-service users on one of the P1s, and I put all my really important exec reports on the other P1. Now it has resources dedicated just to it. The thing with Power BI Premium is you're buying capacity for yourself. It's dedicated to you, but now you're kind of your own noisy neighbor. So you have to watch out for yourself and make sure if you have certain things that are really important, you dedicate resources to those things. Anything else before I go on to monitoring?
We have so many questions. Swati, did you want to get a couple of these? Or did you want to keep going? Like Scott Breyer was asking something I know that Kai is working on. Is there any way to see all the refresh schedules in the capacity itself?
So yeah, let's go to the monitoring app. I'll show you that.
Okay, perfect.
So just a quick recap before I show the monitoring. What happens when you're running out of capacity? Well, we talk about things slowing down. So refreshes take longer because they wait in the queue. Queries become slower because there's less resources to process them, but also they start to get queued a little. And then queries may fail if we can't even load the data set into memory. So how do you see this happening? So we released a few weeks ago, or I guess at this point a couple months ago, this Premium Capacity Monitoring Report. And this is an app. So if you actually go on Get Data, click on Services, and search for Power BI, you'll see the Power BI Premium Capacity Metrics. If you install this app, you'll basically be able to see everything that your capacity supports. Sorry, you'll be able to see all the capacity that you're an admin of. Let me actually go back to that. So within the report, you'll see the different capacities you have access to. And then on this first page, you can kind of filter down to the one capacity that you want to monitor, or you can look cross capacities if you really want to. If you're trying to narrow down a specific problem, I would recommend looking at just the one capacity at a time. So I'll look at this one first. Then I'll click on the Datasets tab. Now there's a Datasets tab because that's the main resource that you monitor in Premium today. But if you've been following our conference news lately, you will see that we have paginated reports, which are the SSRS reports coming to Power BI. We also have data flows. Those will all be other what we call workloads that will show up in here and consume Premium resources. So you have different tabs for them. So looking at data sets, we see a summary of what's going on in that capacity. The number of data sets that are on that capacity, in this case over 4,000. The number of workspaces on there, total amount of memory I'm using, or the average memory I'm using, the highest utilization I get to. Things at a high level. This is all for the last 7 days. Good summary information, but you gotta go to the details if you really want to see things going on. So let's look at refreshes. Good, since that was the first question that was going on. So I look at refreshes here. On the bottom, you can see the number of refreshes per hour. And then when you click on those hours, it'll filter down the top of the report for all the data sets that were refreshing during that hour. So the question before was, how can I see what all the scheduled refreshes are? You can see from this report what refreshes ran and when by looking at the different hours and seeing what's running on those hours. You can also click on the data set itself from the top visual, from the table, and see when that actually ran. So this person's running at least once an hour at certain points. Now you can also see on here the longest running refreshes by data set. And you can also see which workspaces these data sets belong to. So once you know which workspaces they belong to, you can go in the admin UI and figure out who the owners are so you can contact them. Maybe the refreshes are running really long and you want to have them use incremental refresh so they run a lot faster. Queuing up so many resources for so
Josh,
long.
I'm gonna interrupt because there's a question from Matthew Rogers saying, we sometimes get out of memory errors on reports. We have 0 evictions showing in stats app, even though many data sets haven't been touched in hours and days. Candidates for eviction, RAM's not maxed.
Potentially what it is something wrong with a specific query. The query itself might be actually trying to use too much memory. There's certain ways you can write queries that even on a really small data set, that query might use several gigs of memory. And we do cap that at 10 gigs, but also if you don't have enough memory available on the capacity for whatever the size is, it'll fail. Most likely that's the case is my guess, that you have just certain queries. And on the queries tab here, you can kind of see things that are running for a long time. We don't yet show you how much memory a query is consuming, but it is something we're working on. That would be my first guess. Other than that, I would say something's not right and you should open a support case. My first guess would be something with the queries. One last thing to call out in this tab is, and that's the bottom right corner. This is the hourly average refresh wait time in minutes. So this is basically how long are things waiting in the queue. It's the time between when the refresh was asked to start and when it actually did start. So I have on some days, things are taking over 5 minutes on average. On some hours, things are taking over 5 minutes to start running. And in some cases, a little bit longer. Now it's kind of up to you as a capacity admin to say if this is a problem or not. They all finish eventually. But one way to get more refreshes going in parallel is to have more capacity or reduce what I'm doing on this one.
Josh, there's another question around identifying the owners. And there are a couple from Rajamani and Kevin, and they all are interested in knowing about they're looking for owners of the workspace and data sets on the metrics app so that they can reach out to them when there is high utilization.
We're trying to get the actual owner names right in this app so you don't have to go anywhere else. But what you can do today is you can take the workspace name, go to the capacity admin portal, and you can then look up that workspace, and it'll tell you the workspace owners in that case. So you go in here, you go to the admin portal, and then you select the capacity and search for that workspace, and it'll tell you who the owners are. Like I said, we're trying to get it into the report, but not quite there yet. But you can find it. Can I go on?
Yes, please.
All right. That's refreshes. Let's look at queries. So this is now showing me all the queries I have per hour and telling me how long they're running. So it's just like the refreshes. I can click on any of these charts and it'll filter down the other charts to show what was just happening for that particular data set or that particular hour. The interesting thing here too is it shows me then the breakdown of queries by time interval. So 72% of my queries are running in under 30 milliseconds, which is pretty good. In fact, we have to go all the way to, well, almost all my queries are running in under a second. So I would say this capacity is doing pretty well. It has room for the queries. Now, queries can slow down for a couple of reasons. One is you don't have enough capacity and it's just resource constrained. The other is The other is that the query is just a poorly written query, and the two can be related. The two can actually affect each other. Whereas you have a query that runs poorly. Adding more capacity might make that query faster, but also some changes to the query, some redesign might also make it faster without having to get more capacity. And one way to tell if you have a capacity problem or not is to look at the data sets. Look at the ones that are kind of dragging down the averages. If you see like a small number of data sets that are performing really slow on average, but many others that are performing really well, chances are your capacity is fine. It's just something more with those data sets specifically. And then you can kind of target those data sets and see what optimizations can be made to them. Hey, Swati, on the public report now, did we do wait times already for queries?
Yes. Yes, the public report does have.
Oh, sorry, it's the next tab.
Yeah, yes. And Josh, why I have you distracted? There is a question from Shrikant. And his question, Shrikant Sharma, he's asking about the background has dedicated 25 GB and interactive operations have dedicated 25 GB. If that's correct, why is that you're explaining only one part of the 25 GB?
That's not the case. Backend and background are different. So when you buy a P1, you get backend cores that have 25 GB, and that's basically what's doing most of these. That's actually what's doing all these operations I'm showing here. There's other things like kicking off of schedules, alerting. That all happens kind of on the front end cores. That is more of still shared components that we talk about in the premium whiteboard. That's still part of the Power BI shared service and managed by us. But it's the back end is what you're really responsible for managing. And then again, you have interactive versus background jobs on the back end that get prioritized differently, but they're all sharing the same resources in this case. So let's look at query wait times. Actually, right before I do that, you can still see here what are our slowest running data sets. And again, those are probably the ones you want to take a look at first. And more capacity may help, but oftentimes, and more capacity almost always will help, but oftentimes there are things you can do just to optimize that so you get better use out of the capacity you already have. Next one is query wait times, and I almost have none on this capacity. It's just like refreshes. We have wait times for queries, but they're generally much quicker. So where the wait times for refreshes were in the minutes, for queries are in the low number of milliseconds usually. In this case, almost 99.9% of my queries are waiting less than 50 milliseconds. Typically, you'll see most of your queries running under waiting less than a second. Sometimes you'll see getting a bit higher. And if you do see it getting higher and higher, or a larger percentage of queries taking longer and longer to wait before they start running, that's a general sign that your CPU is pretty much loaded. Really, the main reason a query would wait is because it can't get enough CPU resources to go ahead and start running. This is a good indication. If you start to see this over time getting worse and worse, that's a good indication that, hey, you might want to start looking for some, start planning to have some more capacity in there. Then the last tab on here shows you your evictions. So even though this data set's, everything's running really good on there, we still see some evictions happening on certain hours. I only had 14 in the last week. Again, evictions are not a sign of a problem, but they could be a leading indicator. If you do start to see a lot of them, it definitely means we're pulling things in and out of memory. And at some point, it's going to be really hard to start pulling things in and out of memory and keep the experience up. So it is a good leading indicator if you start seeing lots and lots of evictions. That's a quick overview of the app itself. Now, when it comes down to selecting the capacity. This is what's available today for kind of your planning, which is the pricing calculator. The pricing calculator is more meant to just give you kind of an idea of maybe what you need. But this really only looks at the number of users and how frequently they're using it. As I just kind of showed, there's lots and lots of other factors that lead to that indicate, or that will basically determine how many users can fit on a capacity. And just a quick recap of those, things like the data set size and characteristics. You can get a lot more smaller data sets on a capacity than you can larger data sets. How is that data set designed? Do the queries run very quickly, or do they consume a lot of memory and for a long period of time? How many different data sets are going to be used in parallel? If you're going to use one in parallel or one at a time, then you can get a lot of users on that one. If you're going to use hundreds at a time, and it goes back to the size of the data sets. So those are things that you have to consider. How many refreshes are there in parallel? We won't fail the refreshes if there's too many or there's not enough resources for them, but we will queue them up. How frequent are those refreshes? If users are refreshing a data set once a day, it's a lot different than if they're doing it once an hour. How many visuals are on a page is a good one. If you have one visual on a page, basically we'll submit around one query every time you open that page. Some visuals will submit more, but for each visual you have on the page, we generally submit around one query. So if I have 30 visuals on a page, when I first open it, it's probably going to submit about 30 queries. Some cases more. Now, every time I interact, let's say I click on a visual, it's probably going to submit around 29 queries to update the other visuals. So simpler reports with less visuals use less resources than reports with lots of visuals on the same page.
And Josh, for the folks on the call that missed my call with Marco Russo on My Report is Slow, that's the name of the webinar, please do go watch that, because we actually go through how do you figure out which ones are causing the noise, which ones actually can be optimized, and how to optimize it. So sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Josh.
Great. Definitely check out anything from Marco when you're looking for things for optimizations.
And Josh, there's a general question. We have a question from Sai and a few others, and I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your names, but they're generally asking if they can share the capacity dashboard, the app, with other users without adding them as their capacity admins. That's one. And then the other question we've seen a couple ask about is the history, like how much of history we are showing in the app and how much are we going to show in the future.
So these are all features. I mean, we're looking at the sharing is an interesting one because right now we're using the service apps feature of Power BI, which doesn't allow you to share. I know that's something that's on their backlog that hopefully we will open up in the very near future. In terms of the history, it's something we've been asked for a lot too. We're looking to prioritize that. Any of these ideas, though, would be really great if you can go to ideas.powerbi.com, submit them there, and help get them voted up. Typically for admin type features, they don't get as many votes as the other things, but we know that. We know what to look for in those cases. But to have that stuff recorded is really good for us. Just to round this off, how often are users interacting with the visuals? If you're just staring at a report, it's not really doing much. Versus if you're doing a lot of clicks on the report, then you're generating lots of queries. And how efficient are the measures in the data set? You can write some really bad DAX that will consume a lot of resources for a long period of time. And we're happy to have you get more capacity so those run faster. But you may not want to do that. So, it's really on your call at that point. It's to kind of plan your capacity. It's really hard to test for everything, but you do need to do some testing. And what I recommend is that people find something that's representative. Not the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario, but an average user use case that's somewhere in the middle. And come up with a controlled test for that. Get an ASKU from Azure, or get a capacity that you're the only one on. Deploy those reports to it. Come up with some automated tests for it, and run those tests. And those tests should be repeatable. So you should get roughly the same results every time you run them. Usually I throw out the first test because there might be some caching and stuff involved. And once all that stuff's warmed up, I go with all the tests after that, so they all match up. And do it for one user. Look at then the capacity report and see what that test, what that one user, that one average use case is actually consuming. And then you can start to do some multiplication for the number of users and try to figure out how much that capacity will support. Again, you won't be able to find every case, but typically no one's the worst, no one's the best. It all kind of averages out in the middle. So if you can find a good representative use case that represents your data with your real data sets, test them out, see how much resources it's using for one user, and do some multiplication. That'll help you figure out the rest of the how to size the rest of your capacities. And then there's some links here to some YouTube videos about testing in Power BI in general and how to automate that. We're also in the process of working on a new white paper that will talk about this in a lot more detail.
Josh, there's a question from Lutz Benden asking, does the number of data sets per workspace have any performance impact?
Number of data sets per workspace by itself does not have any performance impact. It all comes down to how many are being used at one time. And also you asked specifically performance impact. The number of data sets don't necessarily have a performance impact in a workspace. Again, it comes down to how many are being used at one time, but it's really the number of data sets on the capacity that are being used at one time. It doesn't matter by the workspace.
Ricardo Pedro, you had a similar question on the asking if you have several reports that connect to the same data set, can that impact query performance? Josh just kind of implied that.
That's a good one. If they're all connected to the same data set, then you only have to pay the memory price for that data set once. You don't have to worry about loading. You're not loading a data set for each user in that case, so you can generally fit more on there. Now, data sets that are just by nature, data sets that are consumed by a lot of people tend to be a little bit larger, tend to have a lot more in there. Sometimes use RLS, row level security, and just by their nature can be more intense data sets. But normally that's a good case. If you share as much as possible, then there's less things that need to be moved in and out of memory when they're needed. Now's the time you just start reading off whatever I didn't answer already.
All right. There is a ton. There's no way we can possibly get through them all. I think it was David was asking, when will Premium support R-based visuals and soon to be Python-based visuals?
Support it in the sense where it runs on your capacity itself?
Yes.
Don't have a timeline on it yet. I know it's been talked about, but it's not going to happen in the next few months.
Okay. Josh Vickery, my boy down in San Francisco, thank you for joining us. He wants to know about governance and premium capacities. So he's actually talking about something that came up a couple times, going out and saying, I want these reports or I want these people to actually go out and get more capacity. And I know that we're working on shared data sets where we're actually going to have them blessed and we're actually going to have them certified in an admin tool. So that seems to have a lot of synergy. Can we speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so can you explain the first part a little bit more about people being able to buy the capacities themselves?
No. So by capacity meaning per capacity. So if I want to go out and say, James Phillips at our organization, his reports are going to actually always get a higher priority. So when I say by capacity, I don't mean BY.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And that's where I was saying before where it makes sense to have a specific capacity for them. So all of James's reports should be in a certain workspace, and you put that workspace on a capacity that you keep separate from the other reports. Especially with James, you never know when he's coming in to check those reports. So I know for us, we always want those reports to run fast.
Okay, so I guess let's extract it. And again, it came up a couple times in the chat window. If I have data sets that are a little bit more important, I just want to have them higher priority.
Yeah, so there's nothing that lets you split the priorities within within the interactive bucket. What you can do is you can just have dedicate a certain number of your cores and dedicate a certain amount of memory to the high priority items to make sure that there's always resources there available for them. But there's nothing at the moment that lets you reprioritize interactive stuff.
William Antonican asks, let's start over. Can I purchase Power BI Premium on a monthly basis? What are the different ways I can buy Power BI Premium? And Josh, if I can make sure you cover the A SKUs and the way they are built as well, that'd be great.
So yes, you can buy Power BI Premium on a monthly basis. The way it appears in the portal, in the Office portal, if you're buying directly through there versus your account team, if you're buying through the Office portal, you'll see that, okay, the P1 you can buy monthly, but everything else is a yearly commitment. Everything above the P1 is a yearly commitment. That is technically true, but what you can do is you can buy multiple P1s and pull those cores together into a P2 or a P3, and that would still be at the monthly commitment. We like making things a little tricky, but hopefully we'll simplify that language a little bit more soon. But that's something you can do to try to get any of the sizes on a monthly commitment. If you're just testing things out, I like to push people towards Power BI Embedded in Azure, because in Azure you can buy all the SKUs. They're named a little bit differently, but you can get all the SKUs and you can scale up, scale down, pause when you're not using them, and that lets you really test things out. And then when you're done, you can convert it over. You can go and move those workspaces over to a capacity, a peak capacity.
And those are built on a 30-minute increment, so you're not going to spend a lot of money to do a demo or proof of concept. David, I stepped right on top of you, my friend. You continue.
I'm just saying, Vikrant R just asked exactly about automatic scaling from P2, P3 to P2 to P1, and response was Power BI Embedded, so you actually just touched that.
But it wouldn't be auto scaling. It would be you could scale it.
Yeah. And so I wanted to connect that with the previous request for an API to view metrics data.
So API to view metrics data is also a pretty common request. We're starting from nothing, and we're trying to get as much of the important stuff out as quickly as possible. Now that we've gotten stuff out, we really need to look at what's the most important things now. So we have a flood of requests, especially around the admin stuff. Really go to ideas.powerbi, go to whatever channel you have to talk to us, and just telling us what's important to you will really help us make some of these decisions on what we do for, next, first. And we're still continuously doing stuff as we speak.
And on that topic, Bridget and Golsal0108 asks, looks like a lot of this stuff are rear looking or historically looking. Are you guys looking to build something that is going to be predictive and start using AI to go out and say, this is what you should start thinking about?
So some of these metrics are a little more historical looking. You can use them. Like I said, there's certain things in there that are leading indicators. Like it's not like your capacity goes bad instantly overnight. What you should start to see if you monitor these queries, monitor these metrics, is a natural progression of things going down or getting worse or queues getting longer. It really shouldn't just be an all of a sudden things are bad, now we're in trouble. Why didn't you tell me beforehand? That said, there are a few extra metrics we're going to add that'll give you more of a how is my capacity doing right now? As I was going through those slides I had in the top right corner, like the cold, warm, hot, burning. We're not going to give you something like that again, where it's just a traffic light where we tell you things are bad. But we'll give you metrics where you can really kind of see the health, see the load on the system, and really predict and start to see, am I getting to a point where that is getting too heavily used and I should start to think about more capacity? Like I said, you can do that with some of the metrics that are in there already. We're going to give you some more that are kind of targeted at that type of scenario.
Hey, Josh. So there's a question around from Dan English, from Josh Crawford, and they are kind of asking about the app. So the question is, Dan English asks so this is around the app. If they simply have to update when changes are made, like how do they get the app?
Yeah.
And if they do make, changes, or as in if they do happen to get access to an app, do they have to? So Dan English asked, I will have to check with my capacity admin to do that. But does this mean that it has to be done every time there's an app update? So some clarification that needs to be done around.
At the moment, it has to be done every time there's an app update. You would have to go uninstall and reinstall. Obviously, that's not ideal for the long term. So we're looking at ways to make that more automatic. So right now the ways to know is monitor the blog. Swati, you can answer if we're going to have something in the report that actually tell you when there's a new version available. I didn't hear the latest on that. We're still planning on doing that?
Sorry, Josh, I didn't get your question.
We were discussing before if we were going to actually put something in the report that checks the version number and actually tells you when. We still planning on doing that, or is that still backlogged?
That's still backlogged. We're working on other measures, but that's definitely something that we can quickly put in place, where we put in the version number.
Check the blog, subscribe to it for updates, and we're actively working to make things better. We're starting from a deficit here with nothing available. We've been trying to get everything out as quickly as we can, and still make sure it's useful and accurate as it comes out. So we know we got more to do.
Okay, did you want to grab another one of the questions, or did you want me to take another one? David, Swati, did you have one? I'll take their silences. I get to ask another question. So this is from Mike Zucker. He's asking a question around figuring out what licenses and when to go from pro to a premium. So what's the easiest way, Josh, to figure out how are my users using Power BI Premium? What license makes the best for me, either pro?
Yeah, but there's been all kind of guidance going around when Premium first came out. And I think it's been a little bit more refined as we see how customers have been using it. And what we've really seen is for people who for customers who have a lot of creators, people who are using pro licenses, it's fine to leave those people on shared capacity. It's only really when you need to actually share content with users who are unlicensed, you really need to start thinking about premium in most cases. So if everyone who's viewing, if someone's creating content that's being viewed by other people that all have pro licenses, then there's no real need to put that on a premium capacity. Personal workspaces, there's really no need to put those on premium capacities. Some caveats to this, that's if there's only certain features that you need that are specific to premium, then you might consider going to the premium for other reasons. But normally it's about who needs to see the content, and that's where you'd want to decide, okay, do I want to put them, do I want to get licenses for everyone who's going to view this content, or should I just put this on premium and let anyone who needs to see it come see it? I've seen a lot of companies do is they have like a process where people can nominate their workspaces to go into premium because other people need to view the reports. But in cases where that's not the scenario, it's just a work group, a small part of the organization looking at the same reports, they'll just keep it in shared. I think the tipping point just around price is usually around 500 users when you talk about P1. You're paying $10 a month, that's equivalent to the price of a P1.
Okay, that sounds great. I know that Chris Finland is not on the call, but Leo Frunland asks, in today's session, can you comment on the deployment experience for deploying SSRS in a Power BI Premium capacity?
I cannot as much. I know it's they do it out of Report Builder, and it supposedly looks the same as as it does to SSRS when you deploy. I actually haven't done it myself though.
Okay, not a problem. Victor is asking, why is there a difference in performance of reports which are import based in Pro and will have the same in Premium as well, but at least more control in Premium? I don't know if I asked that exactly right.
So I'm guessing the scenario is you have a report that runs in Pro, totally fine. You decide to move it over to Premium, you get a P1, you move it to the P1, and it's all of a sudden slower. That is very, very possible. The hardware equivalent that we use in Pro is actually closer to the P2 sizes. So you are actually moving it to a smaller piece of hardware in that case. Now it should be a more predictable, smaller piece of hardware, so you can control what other things are running on there, which is what you can't do in shared. So shared, you're kind of getting lucky if it's running, if you're getting enough resources to run that, faster than it would be on Premium. But it's definitely a possibility. I mean, to get more apples to apples, you would want to start more at a P2 level.
Casey Cook is asking a question. I know that we've covered a couple times, but I'm going to ask him to go out to ideas and make sure and give me the idea that was mentioned. How do I figure out where all of my refreshes are available in Power BI service? It's not available yet. It is something that we are working on. The work I know is done from the Gateway team, so they're finished. We just need to finish that work. But if you actually will give me the idea in our chat window, I'll go out and get a status update for that idea. So make sure that the vote is there, and I will actually update it. Okay, Swati, did you have another one that you wanted to ask Josh?
So Josh, there is a question from Itachai about any plans to allow accessing these premium metrics datasets so they can customize their own reports. I think you've kind of touched on that, but I see a couple questions related to that. So maybe you want to just repeat.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. We're trying to get there as fast as we can.
Vikrith is asking another refresh question. Is it possible to get an alert when there's a failure in a scheduled refresh? Actually, that does come back out into the Gateway event log. So that should be happening now. If it's not, we want to take a look at that. There's
been a common request because right now there's an email notification that goes out to the owner of the refresh, but not everybody else that owns the workspace. There's been a common request for the notifications to go out to everybody in the workspace, not just the owner of the refresh. If that's what you meant, please vote that one up on ideas@powerbi.com, because that's one I'm pretty sure we'd all like to have.
Yeah, and for everybody on the call, a lot of comments where they like this format. I do too. So next time we do a big premium update, we're gonna have to get the team back on. So thank you for doing that. In addition to that Gateway refresh notification, I forgot what I was gonna say. Josh, we have about 2 more minutes. YouTube gets really cranky when we actually go over the hour. So I want to hand it back to you to actually go ahead and follow up and close down the call, and thank everybody for joining us.
Great, and thanks, Chuck, for setting this up. That's basically all I had. Thanks for joining us. We'll hopefully do this more often. Please keep sending us your feedback. We have a bunch of stuff we want to do. Only so many resources to do it. So really knowing what's important really helps us prioritize these things. And keep asking questions. We'll have Chuck is helping us with a forum on the Power BI community site. So hopefully there'll be another place for you to ask questions there too. But this is something that we want to make sure. We've done a lot of work in the past few months to make Premium much more explainable than it was, and we want to make sure we're explaining it and you're able to understand and we're doing our jobs properly so that you can really manage these capacities.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. And like I said, I will make sure and organize this again on the next big update for Power BI Premium. This is Charles Sterling, wishing you all a great day.